Without doubt, some of the very best food and wine experiences both of us have ever had anywhere on the planet have been in Italy. It's such a remarkable country on so many levels. But from a wine perspective, this enormous amount of choice, all driven by quality, from the deep south, right up to the Italian Alps, is quite astounding. I don't think there's another country like it in the world.
Fascinating people with stories to share, fabulous wines and the best local foods to accompany them, and beautiful places to discover and visit. All of this and more on Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Tuesday. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today I travel. I'm traveling just downriver from my home here on the River Exe in Devon to beautiful Lympstone Manor, also located on the banks of the estuary, to meet my guest, Steve Edwards, Operation Director of this one-star Michelin hotel restaurant Vineyard, and also now the hands-on Vineyard Manager of Lympstone Manor Estate's 17,500 Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Meunier vines. Steve, I know it's a busy time. You have work to do in the vineyard this morning, especially while the sun is shining and we're enjoying this fabulous run of weather. So thanks for being my guest today. How are you?
Very well, Mark. It's a pleasure to speak to you on your podcast. And yeah, quite right. We've had an amazing start to the growing season, and I'm at a wood desk, so I'll touch that, and long may it continue.
Yeah, I know. It's such a challenge every year, especially here in the UK, although, things have changed so much and we'll discuss that. It's still a challenge every year, as it is for wine growers around the world.
Sure, absolutely. It seems certainly here at Lympstone Manor, we're on our sixth vintage this year, and we planted in 2018, first harvest in 2020. And since that point, it has been a bit of a roller coaster in terms of the weather patterns and the growing seasons and meeting those challenges head on for what we're faced with. Not the extremes of weather that you see in some growing countries, fortunately, but it has been a bit up and down, which is interesting.
Yeah, it certainly has. Now, Steve, before we really get into our conversation, I want you to describe this beautiful Lympstone Manor and the Lympstone Manor Estate vineyard so that our listeners who are located all around the world can gain a visual impression of this incredibly beautiful corner of the world where we both live and work.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have put it better, Mark. We're so lucky to have this incredible position on the south coast of Devon, right on the estuary, literally a mile from the coastline. And we're on a 28-acre site with a gentle slope down towards the foreshore where the property joins. And of that 28 acres, we have just over 11 planted as a vineyard. And with the house overlooking the vineyard site. 17,500 vines went in 2018. And as you've already said, planted to Pinot Noir 50%, Chardonnay 30%, and Pinot Meunier 20%. But before that happened, really, I remember standing on the top terrace overlooking this wonderful vista of the estuary below us. And Michael said, what a fabulous site that would be for a vineyard. And it was essentially just parkland. It had never been used agriculturally. Some livestock at some point, but it had never been planted with crop. I thought that was a really bad idea, knowing the incredible amount of work and expense it would create to create a vineyard. But it turned out it was absolutely the right decision at that point. But, there was a lot of work initially in relation to establishing, whether the soil was good for viticulture, looking at the microclimate that we have in depth. And we started by bringing on a number of top consultants in the UK and looking for a partner winery. We were never going to make the wine ourselves, but I wanted some involvement in that process with a trusted partner that was in the local area. And, there are a number of sites we could choose from in Cornwall and Devon, and we ended up with Lyme Bay Winery over at Axminster, which proved to be very fortuitous. They've not only got a great facility at Lyme Bay for wine production, but they're not contract producers, so they don't make anyone else's wine, just ours and theirs, which of course is a massive benefit at harvest time. We're not in a queue waiting for the press, and the focus is entirely on their product and ours, which is great. And alongside that, a great viticulturist consultant who actually has some vineyards in Crouch Valley in Essex, came down and did the soil analysis for us. And we have this heavy red Devon clay on sandy loam above the Jurassic bedrock, which turned out to be absolutely perfect for the grapes that we wanted to plant, those being the grapes of Champagne, to produce sparkling wine, which historically, certainly in recent decades, the UK has been best known for, particularly in terms of quality. And so the process started, and we were so lucky to be able to engage with top people right at the beginning, because that definitely made the difference, with key decisions being made in terms of not just which varieties, but which the clonal selection of Pinot Noir, of which we have 3 Chardonnay and 2 of Meunier. I mean, these are decisions which are way above us. And so also the employment of a really good vineyard manager from the outset also made a key difference. So whilst Michael and I have been involved in sort of buying and serving and pairing wines for, over 30 years now, we had no idea in relation to the process of starting a vineyard and then producing wine, and then it coming back to Lympstone ultimately was just amazing. And now we're involved in the whole process, both of us at various stages, and it's just so satisfying.
That's really interesting to recall that whole journey starting in 2018. I planted a few of those vines myself. But I think what's particularly interesting about your involvement with the vineyard as vineyard manager now is the wealth of experience you have in hospitality and wine going back 30 years with Michael. And, I don't think there would be any other vineyard manager in the world
Mm.
who would have worked in wine from so many different angles. So just tell us briefly about that journey, about your time. Was it 18 years at 2-star Michelin Gidleigh
Yeah.
Park with Michael Caines? And then, of course, the creation of the ABode group of boutique
Mm.
hotels with Michael.
Mm.
And you were involved with Michael and in helping him to deliver his vision
Yeah.
of Lympstone Manor right from the very outset, well, as it was
Yeah.
actually being rebuilt. So tell us briefly about that journey, but then a little bit more about Lympstone Manor, what Lympstone
Yeah.
Manor offers now.
Yeah, I'd never really thought of it in those lines, Mark, but it's true. Certainly, the amount of experience that I've had working with wine at the very highest level in relation to tasting, purchasing, and serving has been hugely beneficial in terms of defining the style of wines that are produced here at Lympstone. But, I started at Gidleigh Park in 1989 and was the restaurant manager there. And back in those days, that was a 1-star at that time, but we had no sommelier. We had no. It was such a small hotel restaurant. That was part of my duties. So I was very lucky to be able to start engaging in working with a real high quality wine cellar at a fairly young age. Michael joined the team in 1994 and retained the 1-star, and then, as you've pointed out, reached 2 in '98 and held it for 18 years until he departed. But yeah, the wine cellar at Gidleigh was a revelation to me. I really didn't know much about wine at all. And the then owner, Paul Henderson, an American guy, just had a fabulous palate and worked with some really great wine merchants. And probably my mentor, the one great guy, was Bill Baker, who's sadly no longer with us, from Reed Wines in Bristol. And Bill was my mentor to begin with. And the first trade tasting I ever attended in London was with Bill. And it sort of built on from there. And I did some qualifications through Wine and Spirits Education Trust, and my knowledge grew and it developed. But certainly, Gidleigh Park was the start point. And then after I departed Gidleigh in 2001, I literally took a year out and to work a vintage, which I did in Provence in the south of France. Worked a vintage as a wonderful property, Chateau Routas, just to understand the process, the hands-on process of working in a winery, which was a great experience for 6 weeks. I also then travelled to Australia, visited many wineries on the East Coast, that I hadn't had an opportunity to do so. Met a lot of wonderful people. And then I spent a month in California, principally around the Napa. And also, I did exactly the same before returning to the UK and starting back with Michael again on the development of the Royal Clarence initially in Exeter. And then, very fortuitously, Michael engaged with the Brownsword family, and the Brownsword Hotel Group was developed. Glasgow, Canterbury, Manchester, Chester, a number of sites across the country, which was very interesting. And of course, we were involved in the food and beverage side of the business and very successful, both casual and fine dining. And so I was able to expand on my knowledge of both wine purchase and service during those years. And then finally to Lympstone, took the keys for Lympstone Manor. I remember the day. It was September 9th, 2015. And that journey of developing a lovely country house hotel started here on the ex-estuary. And in relation to the vineyard, initially I was wholly involved in that process of the vineyard development. We had a fine vineyard manager, James Matcher, at that point. And, it was his responsibility reporting to Michael on progress. I kept a close eye, of course, but now I have a full involvement in relation to the day to day running of that vineyard and have taken on the management. I remember that leading up to the first harvest, Mark, and this is where certainly my experience to date really came to play. We went through a very long process of looking at what we wanted to achieve in terms of the finished product, the flavour profile of the wines that we were going to produce. And we had a big blind flight, both champagne and English sparkling wines to consider. And we brought across the winemaking team from Lyme Bay, so they were involved in the process to understand exactly what we wanted to achieve at Lympstone Manor. And, we had a very clear understanding about what we wanted to achieve with the sparkling wine, which is principally what our vineyard produces. There are some stills which we can talk about, but it was the sparkling wine that was the focus, certainly at the outset. And, it was very much a champagne style that we were looking at, and a rich style. We've got 50% of the vineyard planted to Pinot Noir, 20% Meunier, 30% Chardonnay. So it's always going to be that red grape dominant sort of style, which we knew and wanted from the outset. But having tasted so many wonderful wines in my lifetime, and Michael too, we had a very clear mindset in terms of what we knew what we wanted to get from the grapes in this vineyard. And the winemaking team absolutely understood the brief and pretty much nailed it first time out, I think.
Actually, Steve, that's really, really interesting to consider how you actually reached that point where you were tasting and deciding on the styles of wine that Michael in particular wanted to be able to serve with
Mm,
his cuisine. And that journey, that tastings, that experience, that knowledge came from years and decades of experience of serving wines at the highest level in two-star Michelin, Gidleigh Park, and Lympstone Manor immediately, almost immediately within 6 months, earned its first Michelin star. And so we're talking about wine at a very high level. And yet you were then able to actually fine tune and think about the wines that would be produced to serve within that environment, which is
yeah.
quite unique.
Yeah, and having worked with Michael for such a long time, I am really in tune and have been for many years in terms of his repertoire and the style of food that he produces. And Michael is one of those great chefs that has a fantastic ability just to be able to really make the flavors stand out in ingredients. Quite robust cooking in the winter, but at autumn and winter months, and then spring and summer. The lovely fresh and clean ingredients. He just has that ability where he has an amazing wow factor to his food. So that's great from a sommelier's perspective, the wine team who I work with quite closely here at Lympstone, because that gives us some really great opportunities from a cellar, which is fantastic, to be able to look at how we pair those wines with food. And we work very closely with Michael and Jordan Denning, his head chef. So when we have seasonal menu changes, Mark, we're constantly thinking about wines that we have and the flavor profiles of the dishes. The dishes are cooked off, we taste them, and then that whole process of, okay, what have we got that's available that might work with these flavors? It all starts. And as you know, we have this great facility here at Lympstone within the wine room where we have our wine emotion machines and a very large selection of by the glass wines. So we have that capacity to be able to offer a very wide choice for all of our for by the glass, including our tasting menus.
Well, it is a fabulous opportunity for wine lovers to really
Mm,
experience wine
mm,
in, at all levels. But I think what's particularly interesting, what's particularly satisfying now, certainly as I've been witnessing Lympstone Manor grow and develop over the 8 years that it's been
mm.
open. You just celebrated the eighth birthday. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, but I think now for wine lovers to be able to come to Lympstone Manor and to arrive and enjoy a glass of classic cuvee looking over the vineyard, or wines like Isabeau or Triassic with
Mm,
Michael's food makes it a very, very special and unique experience. Let's just briefly touch on the range of wines Lympstone Manor
yeah,
Estate is producing. What's also interesting is that I'm thinking back, Steve, that this is the warmest April we've had since
yep.
2020.
Mm,
2020, when of course we were all in lockdown. Lympstone Manor was shut. And I
yep,
think you were spending a lot of time in the vineyard at that time, and it
yeah.
led to some astonishing results. Tell us about that first year.
Yeah, you're quite right, Mark. It was an extraordinary year for so many reasons. At Lympstone here, our first vintage, and there were a lot of people on furlough and locked away at home. I was very lucky enough and fortunate enough to be able to come every day to Lympstone and help out in the vineyard with James during the growing season. And of course, there was no availability for anyone else, where you would have a team of people at key tasks like the winter pruning, also at harvest and so on, because we were all on lockdown and through the growing season too, whether it's shoot thinning or leaf picking or whatever. But it was an extraordinary growing season. It was a really benchmark year, I think, for English wine too. So good was the growing season. All of the fruit on all three varietals reached full ripeness, including the Chardonnay, which was quite remarkable. And I remember when we all looked at tasting the vinified wine over at Lyme Bay, including you, before the blend, just how remarkable it was. I do remember, or I do recall thinking that we had that conversation about, gosh, wouldn't it be great to keep a proportion of this Chardonnay aside and bottle it because it was that as a still wine because it was that
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
But going back to the 2020 season itself, when we reached a period before harvest time, when we're looking at the acid and sugar levels in the grapes, the vineyard manager James sent some bunch samples late September across to Lyme Bay, and they were astonished at the levels of ripeness in the Pinot Noir, particularly one clone, the FR1801, which is Freiburg. It's a German clone of Pinot Noir, and they were astonished at the ripeness levels of this particular Pinot Noir clone, and actually got James to do another send another sample across quickly for analysis because it had actually gone past the ripeness levels really required for sparkling wine production, where you want, lower sugar levels and higher acid levels. And so they said, look, you need to pick this today, or what I think you should do is keep it on the vine and we'll go for making a really good still red wine, which made me incredibly nervous, I have to say, at the point in time, because even in those days, I know it's only a few years ago, but I hadn't been exposed to too much high quality English red wine. Although I do recall having some from the 2016 vintage with you here at Lympstone, and we were blown away by it. But
Yeah, I
that
remember
was
that.
that was from fruit in over on the east coast, and we're here in Devon, so I wasn't totally convinced. But it was absolutely the right decision to do. We picked that block of FR1801 a Pinot Noir last, made an incredible still wine. And in fact, ironically, it was the first wine that we actually released at Lympstone Manor. It spent, 18 months in oak, only 30% of that was new. We looked at the development of that wine all through its evolution, and it turned out to be an absolute star. We were hugely thrilled on release, and it just showed what this vineyard has the potential for producing. Very small quantity, though, only 2,300 bottles. However, we entered it into all of the major international competitions, the IWC, IWSC, Decanter World Wine Awards in 2023. It was the only English still red to pick up a gold medal in the IWC, and it also won a Best in Show trophy for that year. And I guess, Mark, the reason for entering it into these competitions is really to rubber stamp what we'd already thought about the wine. It's not necessarily about gaining accolades, but it reinforces your whole approach in terms of wanting to plant the vineyard. Was it the right thing to do? Are these great wines? Well, if you have some of the top wine critics in the world and on the judging panel, including masters of wine and master sommeliers, and the wines are being tasted blind, which they are, then the answer to that is yes, it was the right decision. So we're enormously pleased, not just with our sparkling wine, our first release of Classic Cuvée, which is also a gold medal and Best in Show trophy winner. But our still wines really turned our approach not necessarily fully on its head, but showed us that in really good growing seasons, when the fruit reaches full ripeness, we absolutely have the opportunity to make some great still wines from this vineyard. Absolutely no doubt. 2022, the next great vintage in terms of weather-wise. We had some drought issues, some drought stress on the vines, which I spotted early on in the Chardonnay. But they're young vines, they've only been in the ground a couple of years. And so, we persevered. And whilst the yield was down, we had incredible quality. And particularly in the Chardonnay, that was just amazing. So the decision was made to keep 2 barrels aside, produce a still wine, which we did. And it was 11 months in oak. And again, a fabulous example of still Chardonnay and something which we're really proud of. And again, the Isabeau Rosé, which is a byproduct's not the right word, but it comes from the tie or the tail end pressing of the grapes for the sparkling wine. Initially, the thought was that Lime Bay would take this juice for their own production. And then Michael said, well, look, what can we do with it? What's the opportunity here? And so they said, well, we could always produce a nice rosé. So that's exactly what we did. And the decision to do that was absolutely right. It's very Provençal in style, just lovely fruit. And so we released the first vintage of that in 2023. Really big success. Very happy with it. And one other thing I should mention in terms of production from the vineyard, Mark, which very, very few people do in the UK, which definitely is a byproduct, and that's the pomace or the skins from the press go off to a local distiller, Lee Curl up at Columpton, and to produce an eau de vie de mar for us, or grappa as it would be in Italy. And from that, it's redistilled into the Lympstone Manor gin. So we have two spirit products as well, which come directly from the vineyard and product from the vineyard, which we're incredibly excited about.
Yeah, it's amazing what has been achieved in such a short time. The vineyard only planted in 2018.
Mm,
And so, this range of wines, and I go back to that 2020 year and the
mm,
heat wave lockdown summer, and the result being this award-winning International
mm,
Wine Challenge gold medal winning Triassic Pinot Noir
mm,
2020. An astonishing wine that really did surprise so many of us, did surprise the wine world, and really, I think, began one of the wines, English wines, red wines, demonstrating that yes, with climate change in the best years, because I know you haven't made it since 2020,
mm,
there is the potential to make great
yeah.
still wines. Going back to the Chardonnay you mentioned, you didn't mention the name, Steve, but I'm going to mention that. That the wine is actually named after you. It's Edward's Chardonnay. And I know Michael wanted to pay tribute to your many, many years of working together
Mm,
and your deep involvement in the evolution of the vineyard and now as vineyard manager.
mm,
So it's a beautiful range of wines. I'm looking forward to. We didn't speak about Classic Cuvée enough. I want to
yeah.
just get a better impression of. I know very much that Michael was very clear, as you said, to make a style of English sparkling wine that would be fitting in the Lympstone Manor environment as both an aperitif wine, but also a sparkling wine that can pair with food.
Yeah, exactly. And the production of that wine, obviously starting with the blend, which we were all involved in, and then finally with the dosage, which was also a really interesting process to go through, which again we were all involved in, but in a more sort of public and trade forum with the invitations, as you know, that we had down at the pool house in order to go through that process. But still, for me, it does go back to the winemaking team and understanding that initial brief, Mark, of what we wanted to achieve, especially the richness of the wine and rounding it out, came through, all three varietals going through full malolactic fermentation, like change of the harsh malic, a green apple acid into soft creamy lactic acid, which was, I think, was absolutely key. And a percentage of the Chardonnay going through, a third of it going through oak aging too for a short time, and it's 3 years on the lease to bottle aging process before release. So important to the finished style of wine. And as I say, I think they absolutely nailed it.
Now, I agree. And as I say, it's a very special experience for those
Mm,
who arrive at Lympstone Manor who, come out onto the terrace and overlook the vineyard and the ex-estuary, the Halden Hills beyond, and
yeah,
even out to sea, looking out to Berryhead. There's a sense of place, a sense of being from here when one can actually enjoy that wine and such a beautiful wine.
yes.
Steve, I'm going to change our subject a little bit now.
Hmm.
I would like to just touch on, I know Lympstone Manor has 600 bins, I believe, but Italian wine has always been a strong part of your list.
Mm,
It was a strong part at Gidleigh Park. I know Paul had a great love of Italian
yes.
wines, and Italian wine is important. You and Michael have traveled to Italy together, and I think I really want our listeners to know what you feel Italian wines,
Mm,
and there's such a range, but uniquely have to offer within the dining experience, both highest
mm.
level fine dine, Michelin star dining, but also in more informal settings, such as Lympstone Manor's informal dining in the pool house.
Yes, no, quite right. I've been very lucky enough to go to Italy on a number of occasions, both for work and pleasure. A number of trade trips, which have just been amazing, and a number of those with Michael. And I have to say, hand on heart, and I'm pretty sure he'd say the same thing, that without doubt, some of the very best food and wine experiences both of us have ever had anywhere on the planet have been in Italy. It's such a remarkable country on so many levels. But from a wine perspective, this enormous amount of choice, all driven by quality, from the deep south, right up to the Italian Alps, is quite astounding. I don't think there's another country like it in the world. And when you combine that with the quality of their cuisine and what they produce, in many ways, a very simple cuisine. It's always driven by quality, and it's the simplicity sometimes which really amazes me. But going back to the Italian selection that we've got here at Lympstone, I'd like it to be bigger because there's always opportunity. There's always something else that strikes you as worth purchasing. We work with so many good merchants that bring in the very best, I think, into the UK. So we're very fortunate to have access not just for Italy, but for a great wine selection from around the world. But, Italy specific, I think there are just some outstanding wines which actually match Michael's cuisine seasonally too. So, whether it's white Fiano from the south, or a nice crisp Trebbiano, or the incredible range of red selections from the Nebbiolos in the north, to the wonderful Syrahs Nero d'Avolas that you find on Sicily, for example. There's just such a huge breadth. Some of the amazing sweet wines too. With Michael, I was on a trip when we looked at some sweet wine production from the Puripans in Suave. They're not specifically known for, but do make a bit of some Rochotto, which was just incredible. I think for me, that's what Italy really gives us, is this huge breadth of opportunity of wines, that clean, fresh, vibrant fruit, right through to sort of wines with great depth and complexity that just never fail to astonish you. And we're so lucky, as I've said, to be able to have access to a lot of these wines and get them on the list here at Lympstone Manor.
Yeah, it's great that you have such a strong list. I know, of course, Lympstone Manor is very strong in the classic areas
Mm,
of Bordeaux and Burgundy and elsewhere. and your own experience brings in some of the top New World wines, Australian wines,
Yeah,
South African wines, American wines. But I'm always delighted at the selection of Italian wines. And in fact, I'm looking forward to getting together with you soon to discuss wine selections and foods for the Italian Summer Festival.
yeah,
Festa that we'll be doing again in early September, which is a great opportunity to enjoy the conviviality
yeah.
of simple foods and wines that Italy also offers. So
Yes.
we'll get together soon over that, preferably over a glass of Italian wine, or if you can spare opening a bottle, I would love to taste Edwards again with you because it's such a
Yes.
special wine. But I know the bottles are very limited, only 500, so I'm not counting on that.
Yeah,
Steve,
well, we'll. I'm sure we can. We'll work something out, Mark. And we're on the cusp of change for the classic cuvee. We're just coming to the end of the 2020. We've held some back for a
okay, great.
future release, but
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
on the cusp of the next release for the classic cuvee, which is also very
Okay.
exciting.
Look forward to tasting that soon.
Yeah.
Steve, I know you have work in the vineyard. I'm going to let you go now, but it's been great to talk to you. We've covered a lot of subjects that I think we're all very proud of down here in the Southwest is what Michael has created at Lympstone
Mm.
Manor, this hotel, luxury country house hotel, Michelin star dining, and now with its own vineyard producing some really fabulous award-winning wine that are just beautiful to enjoy and gain that sense of place, which is what Michael's always been about in his food as well as in pairing wines.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, very lucky, and Michael is a true champion of the Southwest, and has always been proud to represent it to Mark, which is and stayed here. This is where his roots are, and he's always been positioned here, and never tempted to move permanently away to any other region of the UK and or further afield.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, Steve, I look forward to catching up with you sometime soon. But in the meantime, buon lavoro in the vineyard. I know you want to make hay while the sun is shining.
Yeah, they're shooting up now, Mark. I've dropped the bottom wires on the trellising, and the vines are racing away.
So you're tucking in today, are you?
No, no, I'm actually doing some bud rubbing today because
Oh, okay.
that's my worst task of the year. I'd love being out in the vineyard, but that's a bit of a backbreaker. And
Right.
so we'll be rubbing the buds today. And we've had a bit of disease pressure. Humidity levels are really high at the moment at night, and so keeping a very close eye on disease. So
Okay.
yeah, it's all go.
Great. Well, I look forward to following this over the summer as the vines ripen, as the grapes begin to swell, and of course the harvest in October. Thank
Brilliant.
you, Steve. We'll
Thanks, Mark.
see. We'll get together soon. I really
Appreciate it.
appreciate you
Thanks,
joining
Mark.
us.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
All the
Pleasure.
best.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye. We hope today's episode of Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast has transported you to somewhere special. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Likewise, you can visit us at ItalianWinePodcast.com. Until next time, chin chin.